Hey, what's going on, everyone? Running a little behind today, so apologies. I got a good topic we're going to cover, though. Let's see. Okay, cool. Kind of wrote it out here on my notes. I just want to make sure it's kind of plugged in thoroughly. Because last live, I thought it was plugged in, but I don't know. The sound wasn't picking up or something. So, all right, let's see here. Okay, cool. Okay. Saw a few people jumped in. Can you let me know if my audio is working well? Last week, I thought I plugged these in, but the audio was not picking up too well. Just let me know. We're going to get started in a second. I'm just going to wait a minute or two and then we'll rock and roll. We'll be covering kind of an under the radar topic today, especially for an American audience. And that's kind of how to optimize your fiber intake. In particular, how to actually optimize the keystone species in your gut to help improve your overall gut health and ability of your gut to actually be able to assimilate nutrients. So, okay, so you guys, we're just going to get started. Basically, something to remember is kind of like the human body is made up of 12 systems, and they could be classified individually, but really what happens is they end up working as just one unit. You know, like every system depends on every other system, just like your liver is just as important as your brain, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, and one of the key systems is basically your digestive system. Okay, and what you eat, if you kind of think about it, basically composes like everything about you. You know, you're made out of food for the most part. I know that sounds really weird, but if you kind of think about it, your mom's egg was required food to form, and your father's sperm required food to form, et cetera, et cetera. And then as your mom was conceiving you, she required a tremendous amount of food with variable nutrients to be able to grow like a healthy baby and deliver a healthy baby as well. And then as you grew throughout your life, so the various decades you went throughout your life, required various food to form as well. So basically, like everything about you is made out of food. And obviously, you have to use common sense. You can't expect to be healthy eating sick animals and sick plants that are grown with a tremendous amount of chemicals, obviously, right? And one of the things to consider in that conversation is basically like in your gut, there are these things called like keystone species, okay? And these keystone species require fiber for the most part to be fed and to be able to thrive. And then these keystone species kind of create a foundation to your entire digestive system and your body's ability to be able to break various foods down without having all sorts of side effects. So when you create an imbalance in these keystone species, like there's way too much of one, way too little of another one, it creates like various digestive issues over time. And oftentimes these could take years or decades to begin to form. So it's not like something like overnight, because you do hear a lot of people say like, oh, I've been eating this fast food or this poorly, et cetera, for years and years and years, and nothing happened. So that's because nothing does happen like overnight with human health oftentimes, unless it's very extreme. It usually takes many, many years of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices to lead to various chronic health issues. And this may be knowingly done. Very few people actually know how to live health conscious lifestyles, but yet even in that category, people still do the wrong things. But for the most part, it just goes under the radar for many people because the health education is pretty much like non-existent in the US. So you're pretty much left to your own devices to basically remain healthy throughout your lifetime. And that's something to consider because right now, 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unhealthy, and the number one reason for personal bankruptcy in the U.S. Is health issues. So it accounts for like 85% of personal bankruptcies in the U.S. right now. So let's go down the list just like I do with every single one of my lives. We're just going to do kind of like a checklist format of things to focus on. And when you're trying to optimize your keystone species, there are basically three things you have to consider with optimizing your fiber intake, okay? So the first thing to consider, and again, you guys, when listening to people online, I have to say this often, at the end of the day, even with me, like I never met you personally, you know? And nature is a novelty generator, so everyone's circumstance is different. And the only way to be able to give accurate health advice is to really have the person there in front of you and know their particular situation. And ideally, you have some good testing on hand as well, such as like good stool testing in this conversation. And then you can draw up like a good game plan of where they are currently and where they want to get. But when you're listening to people online, just remember they never met you personally. So you can use their advice as like general idea generators of things to kind of think about and then further investigate on your own or hire a mentor to help you investigate those matters. But you definitely don't want to be taking health advice from anyone online just on blanket surface unless it's like super abysmally like very basic common sense information like remember to breathe every day, you know, or things of this nature. So just be careful, okay, and just be very conscious of who you listen to, and then just remember most people are very, very incompetent online. But even for the people that you run into that happen to be, Greg, what's going on? Greg, can you let me know, is my sound okay, or do you hear me from like quite far away? Last week I had an issue, maybe with these earphones. I have 3 different pairs, and I got to mark which one is the one that works because one of them doesn't work. But we'll be talking about fiber optimization and how to basically rewild your digestive system today. So you guys, the 3 main things to focus on. The first one is quantity of fiber. So this is very, very important. And currently in America, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, cool. And Greg, if you have any questions about anything health related, just please let me know, okay? Happy to answer them, even if it's not really related to this topic here. We'll be talking about how to optimize your fiber intake, how to make sure you're getting in the right quantity, quality, etc., and diversity. So the first thing to consider is you want to make sure you're getting the right quantity. And pretty much I could, just from personal observation from being in the health field for like 21 years now professionally, and 40 years in total because my journey started on an off-grid biodynamic farm in Ukraine where I was raised by my grandmother. And that's kind of how my journey into health and wellness started. But from my observation, pretty much 99% of Americans are not getting in enough fiber in their diet. In particularly like fiber that comes with nutritious food, not so much like fiber from like fiber supplements, etc., etc. So the average American is probably consuming like 10, 20 grams per day max, okay? Where the general number that you want to aim for, and you're going to have to experiment from A/B testing on your own, is basically like 20 to 30 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. So if you're consuming 2,000 calories a day, let's just say, you need around 40 to 60 grams of fiber every single day to have enough resources to feed these keystone species in your gut so that you don't develop gut dysbiosis, basically. And that's kind of when you get an overgrowth of one keystone species compared to various other ones. And you get kind of like imbalances going on in your digestive system, which lead to various digestive disorders over time. And again, you guys, this takes oftentimes, for many, everyone is different, no absolutes, but for many people, years and years, if not decades, to finally start feeling serious symptoms, which then kind of incentivize people to go get checked out by their doctor. So basically, you want to aim for about 20 to 30 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. So 2,000 calories, you should be getting about 40 to 60 grams of fiber, of soluble and insoluble fiber, a mix, ideally from whole food sources too, not from like a supplement source. And just to give you an idea, like hunter-gatherers ate around 150 to 200 grams of fiber every single day, depending on the source you look at. And you can check out like even hunter-gatherer societies that still exist to this day, for the most part, well representative of those that existed even 10 to 50,000 years ago. The Hunza, they still eat around, they're heavy in meat too, but they still have a tremendous amount of fiber in their diet. Usually from the sources I've been able to find, somewhere between 150 to 200 grams of fiber every single day, which is a lot compared to the average American, which is consuming like 10 to 20 grams of fiber per day. So 10 to 20 for the average American, 150 to 200 grams a day of fiber for the average hunter-gatherer. And you guys remember, fiber does come intertwined with very nutritious food as well. So you'll be able to find a tremendous amount of fiber in like nuts and seeds, grains, organic fruits and vegetables, et cetera, okay? So various things of that sort. It's not like necessarily you need to get a fiber supplement. Your first go-to should be to try to optimize the results from just whole food only, which is more than enough for pretty much 99.9% of people once they do it correctly. So again, we got to get those keystone species fed in the gut. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure you have the right quantity of fiber. And generally, you want somewhere between 20 to 30 grams per 1,000 calories consumed every single day, okay? So that equates for 2,000 calories. Again, that equates to anywhere from 40 to 60 grams. So the next thing, once you're getting in the right amount of quantity, the next thing you want to be concerned with is diversity, okay? Diversity of fiber is very, very important because each of these keystone species, they require, like certain nutrients and fiber that comes with it, et cetera, to thrive and be able to survive and then assimilate the food you take in. And remember, if you have digestive issues, one thing to consider is if you're sourcing high quality food, but you continue to have persistent digestive issues, your digestive system is going to have a tough time breaking down this nutritious food. So yes, you want high quality food, but you also want a digestive system that has enough balance and resilience to be able to take in these nutrients and assimilate them and then basically distribute them through the 12 human systems you have and need to survive in the external world. So diversity is going to be one of those things that are very important because if you keep eating the same exact food all the time, you're basically kind of like feeding the same exact keystone species all the time. And they're getting a lot of food, thus they're growing, but then you're starving out all these other keystone species, okay? And thus you have gut dysbiosis, a gut imbalance. So you have a lot of one species and very little of another one, and thus you create various overgrowths, et cetera, which are going to lead to digestive systems over time. So the general idea with diversity is you want about 30 to 40 different sources of fiber per week. I know that sounds a lot, but it's not too difficult. Like for example, let's say you buy a mixed bag of carrots. They have like 4 different colors. They have the purple color, red, yellow, orange, okay? So I consider those as 4 different sources right there. And then let's say you buy another frozen bag of bell peppers, a mix of bell peppers. And these are already processed into smaller pieces. So there you have the red bell pepper, green bell pepper, orange, and probably yellow one as well. So you got 4 right there. So just in those 2 bags, you have 8 different sources. And then let's say you have some steel cut oats in the meal in the morning with some raspberries. Those are 2 different sorts. So you're up to 10 already just in that one day. So I know it sounds crazy to say you need 30 to 40 different sources of fiber per week. Some people would argue even more, but I would say that's a good starting place. But it's very, very easy to hit. And I'll actually show you how to do that as well as we continue with this live here. So let me just take a look at my notes here. And this part is actually fairly difficult for people to do because in America, not only do Americans have very little quantity of fiber in their diet, like I mentioned, 10 to 20 grams on average per day, where you should be consuming about 40 to 60, if not more. Again, hunter-gatherers consumed 150 to 200 grams of fiber per day. But another negative that leads to probably 40% of Americans developing chronic digestive issues their entire life is the lack of diversity of fiber in their diet too. And this conversation could be approached from two different vantage points. One vantage point is with any industrial agricultural system, you're already going to be more limited in terms of what you have accessible for you at the local grocery store, because it's hard to run a scalable company when you have so much different variety of everything. You just need a few good products that sell consistently and then kind of mass produce those products for the masses. So, for example, a lot of people don't know, but there are 500 different varieties of carrots, just carrots alone, and then hundreds and hundreds of different varieties of tomatoes and stuff of this sort, okay? So there's so much variety that's grown out in nature and so much diversity, but if you go to the grocery store with carrots, for example, what do you run into? Most of the time, people just have orange carrots available to them, or maybe they have a small mix of like orange, purple, and like maybe a white or red carrot as well, maybe. And that's actually in not that many grocery stores, all right? But again, looking at the diversity, you're having about 500 different types of carrots out in nature, out in the world, okay? But you have a very small amount available for you at a grocery store. And then on top of that, people tend to narrow their choices even more in the sense of they keep buying kind of like the same products over and over again for various reasons. It could be for time economics, it could be for financial reasons because it kind of standardizes your grocery store bill, et cetera, et cetera. But the end result is they don't have that much diversity in their diet. And again, the majority of Americans, the large bulk of their diet comes from processed food, which is not going to have pretty much any fiber at all. They do now have some cereals, like more of the organically themed cereals that tend to have a bit more fiber, maybe 4 to 5 grams of fiber per cup of cereal. But in general, processed food is going to have 0 fiber. And you can look back of the label in the ingredients section, you will see there's pretty much 0 fiber in any of that processed food. And a lot of times that processed food or excess sugar, et cetera, creates more gut dysbiosis in a person's gut, et cetera, et cetera. So it leads to more issues. And so you have those two issues. First, industrial agriculture limits the amount of food that is produced. And there's a tremendous amount of consolidation in the food system in the US. So I know when you go to the grocery store, you see so many different companies. But basically, pretty much for 99% of the companies you see, all the raw ingredients they get come from 10 to 12 different companies. And that's it. So basically the CEOs of 10 or 12 different companies dictate what pretty much like 99% of Americans end up eating on a daily basis. And the way vertical integration works in just kind of scalable businesses, you need to have a few key products and then kind of mass produce those products. So the variety that's available to you is going to be quite limited. But don't let this hold you back. If you are consciously aware of it, there is enough selection to be able to get your 30 to 40 different sources of fiber per week, but you just have to be more consciously attuned to that and make the right choices. So, and boom. Okay, so I'm looking at my notes here. Let me just get a quick sip. Okay, so one thing to consider too, and this is where really good coaching comes in helpful. So this is kind of like what I would do personally, is if, first of all, you have not been eating that much fiber in your diet altogether for many years or maybe your whole entire life, it's important to kind of gradually introduce all of this into your diet over many, many months, okay? Because your gut, it will produce the right environment over time to be able to assimilate whatever food you introduce to it. But you need to do this over time. So with the diversity, for example, if you don't have that much diversity of fiber in your diet, you may need to introduce 10 fiber sources for like 3 to 4 months, and then introduce 5 more on top of those 10 you introduced for another 3 to 4 months, and then slowly work up to your 30 or 40 different sources of fiber over like a 12 to 15 month period, okay? And then from there, you can kind of just adjust accordingly. Everyone is going to be a little bit different, so you have to, the thing with human health is there are no absolutes, okay? So don't kind of look for an algorithm. You need to follow a few certain rules, but then at a certain point, you need to kind of do some A/B and testing and just see what works for you personally, and stuff of that sort, which may be challenging for a lot of people because unfortunately, a lot of people are on a lot of medical drugs, and these medical drugs throw off your biochemistry quite a bit, including your digestive system. So it kind of sends false signals to what's right to do or not right to do. Like, for example, if you have a rock stuck inside your shoe and you take painkillers, of course, you might not feel the rock for a while, but that doesn't mean that rock is not continuing to do damage to your foot. And then eventually you'll need higher doses of those painkillers, which are going to disrupt your gut microbiome even more, possibly create pain addiction, a pain medication addiction, which is a very serious problem in the US, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying. It's kind of like very common sense. But you want to kind of like gradually introduce these. Again, I would say through like 3 to 4 month intervals. All right. So the two things we covered, quantity is quite important. We mentioned that you need about 20 to 30 grams per 1,000 calories. And then diversity is very important as well. And you would need about 30 to 40 different sources of fiber per week. And these don't have to be like, not every single one of these sources has to be in like large quantities. Like you could even do a teaspoon or a tablespoon of chia seeds left overnight that you can sip on in the morning. It's a very small amount, but even that can count as one fiber source. You know, it doesn't have to be large quantities. Each one does not have to be large quantities. So, okay. And then the third thing to consider is you want the right quality of fiber. So another thing to consider with the human digestive system is it's spent, let's say the Homo sapien has been around, which is us right here. We're actually the last standing human species, believe it or not. A lot of people don't know, but there used to be 28 plus human species that have come and gone over the years. Some of them were around a very long time. Richie, good to see you. Some of them were around a very long time, like the more popular ones, like the Neanderthals, which were around for about 200,000 years. And then they just disappeared over time. They went extinct. And there have been 28 human species that have come and gone, and all of them went extinct for one reason or another. And we're the last one standing. So like the Homo sapien, so us right here. And there's actually a good book, Chip Walter, I believe the author's name is, and it's called The Last Ape Standing. So actually one of my favorite books. And he outlines the 28 human species that have come and gone, and also his prediction on the evolution of the Homo sapien into more of a cyber sapien. As you guys can see with all of this AI and these implants and stuff of that sort, there'll eventually be a transition to more kind of like a, you know, if you play the game Cyberpunk 2077, kind of in terms of like meshing machine with human, with AI, etc. And then I think personally it'll kind of transition to kind of like the Borg from the Star Trek, for you Star Trek fans. And then it kind of eventually full AI, but we're kind of going on a different tangent here. So you have to remember the human digestive system has spent millions of years evolving with the soil food web of the Earth, which is, the Earth is about, you know, it's predicted to be about 4.5 billion years old. And the universe is some like 11 to 12 billion years old. And all of that evolution, you know, the 11, 12 billion years of evolution of the universe, which then formed the galaxy, which then formed the solar system, which then formed our planet. And then the planet has been around for 4.5 billion years. it's gone through very, very complicated evolution to be able to grow the type of soil food web that gives rise to the food we eat, okay? And then the digestive system has evolved in tandem with that evolutionary process to be able to, Revis, Ricardo, what's going on, man? To be able to recognize the food and be able to assimilate it. So it's very important that you eat real whole food that's ideally, I would even argue, as far away from farming or industrial farming as possible. And forget about all the processed food. That for sure, your body is not going to be able to recognize because all of that food is grown or made with chemicals that are very new, maybe as new as 1950 or sooner, maybe 1980, 1990, et cetera, et cetera. So your digestive system hasn't evolved to be able to recognize that type of food. And when it cannot recognize that type of food, you're going to have some side effects. Some people will have major side effects, some people have minor side effects, et cetera, et cetera. But in a long enough time frame, trust me, 99% of people will have some type of side effects. And again, if you look up the stats, last time I checked, 40 or 45+% of Americans have chronic digestive issues that don't go away ever. They face these their entire life, and it's mainly honestly due to just Americans not living a health conscious lifestyle, the obesity epidemic, Americans being on so many different medical drugs, and all of these medical drugs, most of them, even antidepressants, for example, impact how your gut microbiome functions. All of them have an impact on your digestive system. And many people take a cocktail of these different drugs. So maybe 8, 10, I've had clients come in on almost 20 different medications. And you guys have to remember, when a lot of the safety studies are done on these types of medications, they're never done as a cocktail. They're just usually tested in isolation on their own, presuming that is the only medical drug the person is ever going to use. And you guys have to take this seriously and look at it under a microscope, because the third leading cause of death in the US is medical malpractice. And a big portion of that, about 250 or 350,000 Americans, die just from prescription medication every year, okay? Depending on the source you look at, but those numbers should be about right. All right, so it's very, very serious. And to give you guys a perspective, the Vietnam War was 10 years long. It's a very intense conflict. And during that 10-year period, you had about 50,000 American soldiers die in combat, okay? During 10 years. So that's pretty much like 5,000 soldiers dying in combat every single year, which is still a pretty large number. Just imagine 5,000 body bags laid out, how many of those body bags will be. But now you have, 250 to 350,000 Americans dying every single year from medical drugs, from side effects of medical drugs. So that's a lot. That's pretty much how much American soldiers died in World War II, the entire war. I think it's about 240,000 or so, KIA, over a very intense world war. But yet you have that many Americans dying every single year. And no one's batting an eye. It's just, Americans now, 2025, are the most medically drugged out humans in all of human history. But yet remain also the sickest humans in all of human history. So, of course, it's a systemic issue, but it's also an individual issue, because people keep paying into this kind of sick care system, and they kind of remain sick, If you stop paying into the sick care system and started asking deeper questions of why you're sick, you'll get better answers and be able to put your money into better directions that are actually going to heal you. So anyways, you guys, back to the quality here. Take note, the big takeaway is the human digestive system has evolved in tandem with the soil food web to be able to recognize and assimilate that food. So it's very important to eat whole food, but ideally very, very important to eat high quality whole food that's ideally not grown with a tremendous amount of biocides, synthetic biocides. So this could be pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, rodenticides, herbicides, etc., etc. You know, the average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America is born with about 200 trace amounts of 220 or 120 different industrial and agricultural chemicals in their bloodstream already, okay, which is startling. The toxic load is so high on this organ tissue, all right? And you guys have to remember that all of these biocides are created to kill living organisms. Last time I checked, you're a living organism, okay? And you can go to pubmed.gov and, you know, just start off with researching glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup Ready. There are hundreds of different Roundup Ready products. You can find a lot of them at Home Depot, your local Home Depot. But start reading up on this research on how it negatively impacts your gut microbiome, okay? And it's not surprising because that's what these chemicals are supposed to do. They're supposed to kill living organisms. And if you look at workers that distribute these chemicals onto crops, you will see they wear hazmat suits. You know, they have masks, they have whole body suits, etc., etc., and they're spraying this stuff all over your food, all over your vegetables, all over your produce, etc., etc. It secretly makes it into the meat supply too, because in terms of herbicides, Roundup Ready, it's heavily used in corn and soy, GMO corn and soy production on top of that. Then that's fed to factory farmed beef, you know, cattle, chicken, turkey, pork, etc., etc., farmed fish. That makes it into their tissue as well. And then you end up eating that food, so it makes it into your tissue and thus continues to disrupt your gut microbiome. Negatively, obviously. All right. You guys have to remember these pesticides. I know you think they're tested for safety, but they're never tested for safety as a complete formulation. What the regulatory bodies require from a legal perspective is just for chemical companies, which do all this testing in-house by their paid scientists and then send in the results to the FDA for approval. So it's kind of like having a teacher grade your own exam, for example. Obviously, most people are just going to give themselves a B or an A, no problem. And they're only required to test the active ingredient in isolation on its own. And that's it. So an entire formulation is composed of an active ingredient, for sure, but also a myriad of inactive ingredients. And those inactive ingredients are very, very important for the toxicity of the active ingredient. Like with glyphosate, for example, if you just spray glyphosate, which is the active ingredient of a complete formulation, one ingredient among many, it's fairly harmless. It is very bad at killing weeds. Roundup Ready is a herbicide that is used to kill weeds. But when you introduce those inert ingredients or inactive ingredients into the whole formulation, then you basically can breathe glyphosate onto these plants and the weeds end up dying like right away, okay? Because that's what it's supposed to do. That's what those inactive ingredients are supposed to do. So maybe a better way to look at it is, imagine a person, some kind of group testing the lethality of a rifle, but they only test the bullet in isolation by throwing the bullet at like some dummy and saying like, oh, you see, it didn't cause any damage. But that's not how it's used in the real world, you know? The bullets are used in the real world with the use of a gun. You know what I mean? And all the mechanics of that gun. So you can look at the gun as all those inactive ingredients and the bullet as the active ingredient, okay? And they're just testing the bullet in isolation on its own without the rifle for safety. Sounds pretty stupid, I know, but that's exactly how it's done. And that's also how it's done in the European Union as well. Same exact procedures. That's actually where that model started. I think it started around 1960. Because scientists started noticing, you know, a lot of these chemicals creating disruption in the ecosystem and various health problems, and they're like, oh, you know, something may be up, et cetera, et cetera. So they started testing these chemicals, and they found out, hey, they are actually toxic and causing a lot of disruption to the ecosystem. So they created this kind of like on the spot working with industry that kind of benefits industry, because the industry just has to test the active ingredient, but they don't have to test the inactive ingredients, the inerts. So they can mix up those inactive ingredients any way they want, which allows them a lot more flexibility in creating more formulations. Like Roundup Ready has hundreds of different formulations. Sometimes the active ingredient is just like 1% of the formulation or 0.5% of the formulation. Sometimes it's like 50% of the formulation. You can look at the back of the label and see what I'm talking about. Just unfortunately, at least in the US, the inactive ingredients are always like a proprietary blend, a company secret. So you can never research those ingredients yourself in terms of how they impact your health. But trust me, it's always going to be a negative impact. Whether it's a huge negative or a small negative, it's going to vary from person to person. Some people are also extremely hypersensitive to some ingredients, so for them it's going to be pretty severe. Okay? And stuff of that sort. And also take into consideration that in a farming cycle, farmers use many different complete formulations all at the same time, and oftentimes they actually mix these formulations into one container and just spray that as like one chemical unit, which increases the synergistic effect of these chemicals. So now with a lot of chemicals, for example, individually they may not be that potent, but when you combine them, they magnify the potency. So now instead of like 1 + 1 = 2, could be 1 + 1 = like 1,000 or something of this sort. And you guys, don't take my word for it. Go on PubMed.gov. There's so many studies out that prove that the complete formulation of pesticides are far more dangerous and toxic than the active ingredient in isolation on its own. That's obvious. And also that combining chemicals in a farming system, which happens everywhere, adds to the toxicity of these chemicals, etc. None of this is tested for safety. Okay, so a good first bet is just shop organic. Some people are going to tell you, well, organic uses pesticides too. Sure. As a last resort, they do use pesticides, but organic pesticides are like salt and water, or vinegar and water, or, soap and water, soap like the stuff you use to wash your body in water, or copper, and stuff of that sort. All of this could be classified as a biocide because if you spray enough of it on the soil, it does disrupt the soil food web. But also it depends on what type of organic you're talking about. Are you talking about industrial organic, which basically grows all of their crops in an industrial monocrop food system, but only uses organically approved biocides? Or are you talking about legitimate organic, where there's a tremendous amount of biodiversity? So you have, like in biodynamic farming, you guys can look into it. Okay, you have like a tremendous amount of different crops, different vegetables, rotate seasonally as well. A lot of times certain plots of land are just left to rest instead of used season after season after season, thus depleting the soil very quickly, et cetera, et cetera. So it also depends on what type of organic you're referring to. But a good first step for the general audience is just look for that USDA organic label. It's a great first step. It's not a perfect label. It is a strong label. It's not perfect, but it's a good step in the right direction to dramatically decreasing or eliminating completely your exposure to synthetic biocides, which are, again, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, insecticides, et cetera, et cetera. And I've only seen this have a gargantuous positive impact on my clients over 20 years because it's just common sense. We're made out of food. Even your brain is made out of food, okay? And your brain produces your thoughts. So if you have a sick brain, you're going to have sick thoughts. And your consciousness kind of uses your brain to experience the external world. So if you have like inflammation in your brain, you're going to have a distorted experience of the external world in a negative way, distorted in a negative way, okay? So it's just common sense, really, you guys. And if you look at even something as simple as acne, like teenage acne or adulthood acne is very common as well. You will see in a myriad of studies, hunter-gatherer or tribal societies, they don't have an issue with acne, okay? And you can look at these documentaries on YouTube. There's like trillions of them now. You see like clear skin in their teenagers, clear skin in adults. They don't have acne, but you do see a gargantuous amount of teenagers having acne in the US, for example. I was actually one of those. I had terrible back acne, and I did, even though I was quote unquote health conscious, I learned a lot since then, but I was still working out regularly, only basically, drinking water and teas, and not eating fast food, not drinking soda, not eating processed food, etc. But I would still get these bad breakouts on my back in high school. And I'll go to the doctors and they would say, oh, it's your hormones, when you're going through your teenage years, your hormones are all over the place and it causes this acne. But when I would travel, especially to go visit my grandmother that was still alive in Ukraine, it would disappear, And I found that so odd that it would just disappear there. And then when I get back into the States, reappear, And I brought this up, and, a lot of times the doctors are like, well, there's no evidence to show that food impacts acne, et cetera, et cetera. This was a while back, obviously. But you can go literally go to Google AI, right? Acne prevalence in tribal societies, and see what comes up. And it will show you that it's an invisible rarity. Almost nobody has teenage acne, for example, in these tribal societies. And it shows, and actually some of the studies I read showed that when people that live in those societies go into industrial society and get more into, factory farmed food grown with all these biocides and processed food, they start forming acne. So there is definitely, for sure, a strong correlation between the quality of your food and the quality of your health. Yeah, so Ricardo, he's mentioning our skin is a great indicator of our health, gut health. Yeah, exactly. And it's an organ itself, It's the biggest organ in your body. But yes, it is a reflection of how good your, liver is doing, small intestine, large intestine, kidneys, etc., for sure. Stomach, stuff of this sort. So you guys remember, it's just common sense. Like everything about you is made out of food. If you're eating sick animals and sick plants grown with gargantuous amount of chemicals, like you can't expect to be healthy. No freaking way. No way. It's not going to happen. So guys, I'm going to close this out pretty soon because I got to get ready for a client call. But to summarize, when you're looking to optimize your digestive health, there are 3 big pillars to focus on. Quantity. Make sure you're getting the right quantity of fiber. Make sure you're getting the right diversity of fiber too. So the quantity we mentioned was like 20 to 30 grams is a good start for every 1,000 calories. The diversity we mentioned is around 30 to 40 different sources of fiber per week, variable. And you could even go a step further and change it seasonally too, if you like. All right. And the next one is quality. Make sure the sources you're getting from are from whole food sources primarily. Okay. And ideally, those sources aren't grown with a tremendous amount of chemicals. All right. I'll show you guys some sources of fiber because a lot of people are like, where do I even find the fiber? So remember, fruit. So I have some fruit here, mixed fruit here, all organic, of course. Grains. This company is great. Okay. They're available in pretty much anywhere in the US. Any type of grain is going to be pretty rich in fiber. They're not like the best source of fiber, but they are a source of fiber. You can do chia seeds, or flax seeds, golden flax seeds, brown flax seeds, etc., etc. Chia seeds are cool, like if you put it in some tea overnight or something, and then drink it the day before. It could be like, for example, here, 1 tablespoon has 4 grams of fiber, dietary fiber, just in these guys here. Kind of don't even have a taste to it either. Any type of nuts and seeds, I love buying these, like a mixed bag. because that could give you a diversity and quantity very quickly there, you know? And it's like 1 cup has 8 grams of fiber, just with this guy here. So that's a lot. I love steel cut oats. This is another great source of fiber. So this one has 20 grams per cup, which is a lot, you know? So you could get almost like roughly half of your fiber intake in terms of quantity per day just by this guy here. This is a great company. They also test for glyphosate here. Let me see where it is. Yeah, so right here, boom, right? And it's also USDA organic certified, which also when it's USDA organic certified, it also means not genetically modified, and it also means glyphosate isn't used. But it's nice to see these two because they're just more audits, you know, more eyes on the product to make sure it's a clean product, which is great to see. Guys, as a last resort, again, stick to whole foods, but even this I would consider like a pretty good whole food. It's just some kind of like minimally processed organic fiber mix. So this right here has, I think, like 9 different sources of fiber. You know, it has, let me read this here, just some of them. So flaxseed, sprouts, quinoa, chia seeds, like we mentioned before, millet, buckwheat, etc., etc. And it has it in pretty small quantities too, which is ideal for most people, especially in the beginning stages of their journey. I know, knowing the American crowd, they're going to go for this first, but this should be like the last resort. You should really optimize your fiber intake through whole food choices first, okay? And then kind of think about supplements after, because if you haven't mastered like this type of information, moreover, mastered the application of this type of information on a consistent basis, like you're just wasting your money with supplements. How many times have you guys seen super unhealthy people in the supplement aisle stacking their cart with expensive supplements, but they just look terrible, you know, because they're trying to skip steps. You need to first master the absolute basics of being a human before you dive into tinkering with supplements, in my opinion, okay? So by mastery, I mean just focus on these 4 variables first. Are you, sleeping 8 hours a day? No? Well, you need to master that first. Are you using movement as medicine? Let's say at least 4 days a week. This could be anything you like, but like weightlifting or walking or whatever, at least 4 days a week. Are you eating just real organic food? Okay. And then 4th, are you living close to your core values? Okay. There are more topics to focus on, but those are the 4 big ones. And unless you haven't fully mastered those 4, you're really wasting your money with all these isolated vitamins and minerals and stuff of this sort. And you can tell the person's not looking good, still not feeling good, although they're popping like God knows how many pills. Just results speak for themselves, kind of. Just be honest, trying to save you a lot of money here and a lot of time and frustration. And they're like, well, I'll be worse off without them. A lot of times, not the case. Because, first of all, their sourcing of supplements sucks too. And if they're sourcing poor quality supplements, the raw ingredients, if they're grown with a lot of these chemicals, these biocides, they're going to make it into that supplement in a concentrated form, plus a bunch of heavy metals. And you're just increasing your toxic load at that point. And then we can get into the nuance and details of like isolated vitamins and minerals especially don't happen in nature anywhere. You don't find just vitamin C anywhere. You don't find just vitamin A anywhere. You find vitamin C in an orange, but you also find a myriad of other nutrients, countless. And we don't know of many of them at this point either. It's not like we've mastered the understanding of nutrition or anything of that sort. So whenever you take an isolated vitamin, it's usually very concentrated. So when you take vitamin C, like 1,000 milligrams, your body thinks you just literally ate a whole bag of oranges of just vitamin C. But it doesn't recognize just vitamin C. So it has to replicate this vitamin and mineral complex that's typically found with vitamin C. So it extracts that from your tissue. So you may have possibly, probably never actually, but let's say the lottery chance winning, you may have possibly gotten rid of one symptom, but now you have 3 or 4 other symptoms because it created deficiencies elsewhere trying to replicate this high concentration of vitamin C. And most of the time people are just very nutritionally deficient in a gargantuous amount of ways, okay? So some things to consider when trying to optimize your health. There's a lot more to it. I'm always a big advocate of getting good testing done. A Biome FX stool test is a great tool. I don't get any kickbacks from these guys. They haven't paid me. They don't send me free testing myself. But you can check it out, and they basically send you a stool test to your home. You take it, they send you to a lab, and then it can give you a good overview of how well and how balanced your keystone species are doing. And if you have other things going on, like a bacterial overgrowth or a fungal overgrowth or a parasite overgrowth, which are extremely common. So if you do have any one of those, just know you're not like 1 in a million. In fact, if you don't have any of those, you're probably 1 in a million in the US, because those are so common for people to have, because they're typically like a byproduct and a result of people eating not real food, eating a lot of processed food, having a gargantuous amount of inflammation and stress in their life. Stress also causes inflammation and alters the digestive system's ability to function well. They don't have diversity in their diet at all, and they don't have the right quantity of nutrients and fiber either. So it's a failure at many different levels, and all of these levels have to be approached depending on the bandwidth of the patient. Has to be approached one at a time, of course, because not many people have the bandwidth, because they're coming in a very sick and depleted state already. So you just got to go slow, got to go easy, and you could become your own mechanic. Take courses on digestive health. I'll list like a few good ones in the comments section. A lot of these do require you to be like a certified nutritionist or like an RD, but some of them don't. So it's something to look into. And yes, they cost money. I don't know, it could vary from $800 to $2,000 for like a 3 to 4 month course or something of that sort. But that's not that much. The average American spends $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses every year, traveling here and there and there. I would say, honestly, if you're like mentally troubled or physically troubled, or have digestive issues, all your energy and finances should be allocated to fixing that issue, not planning your next Euro trip. You're in a state of disease, and you got to treat that disease just to improve the quality of your life in the moment, but also to save yourself a gargantuous amount of pain and money long term. Like I mentioned, 85% of personal bankruptcies in the US are due to health issues. And a lot of these health issues could be so easily avoidable. Like 900,000 Americans die from heart disease every year. Heart disease is so easy to avoid, and please don't be naive. It's not your genetics. Even for the 1 out of every 450 where it is really honestly just hereditary high blood pressure for one reason or another, genetics loads the gun, but your decisions for sure pull the trigger, okay? So it's not genetics, it's just humans are living a life out of complete alignment. By I say humans, I mean mainly Americans or Westerners. Their food sucks, their sleeping schedule sucks, their core values are a complete mess. Like I spoke to a male, 58 years old, just a few days ago, like a complete mess, obese, on a bunch of medical drugs, admits to it, but spending tens of thousands of dollars on a house remodel, and then claiming he doesn't have enough money to eat healthy, Like I say, guys, sick people cannot make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be sick to begin with. It just makes sense, So Okay, so I hope this helps. I got to get ready for my next call. And have a good weekend, okay, guys? Take care.